Week 4 is done, leaving another trail of bodies in its wake, this time headlined by the loss of Malik Neighbors and Tyreek Hill for the entire season. Our activeness on the waiver wire becomes all the more crucial as we try and recover from another massive blow to our fantasy lineups. I'm John Macri, joined as always by Nate, the great Jahnke. And for this episode of the PFF Fantasy Podcast, we'll be going through all of the key waiver wire claims to make heading into week 5 of the NFL season. Nate, one day we'll have the abilities to turn injuries off in the NFL. I believe one day. It won't be in our lifetime. And, there will be maybe less of a need for a waiver wire show, but that's not today. So hopefully we can continue to help fantasy managers who have been burned through the early part of this season.
Yeah, too many injuries, and they've often been to players that I was down at the start of the season, so hopefully your fantasy team is doing good. Not so much because the players I suggested to pick are doing well, but because the players I suggested to avoid are no longer playing. So at the end of the year, I'll be able to write my what I got right, what I got wrong, and there'll just be a big section of I can't say I got it right or wrong because the player got injured. So hopefully you weren't affected too much by the injuries, but if you were, we are prepared to help you out with your roster.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? There's plenty of fantasy rosters out there that were burned for sure. And yeah, we're going to be going through all of the relevant waiver wire targets here heading into week 5, as we just try to kind of persevere through the injuries. Oftentimes that's what our fantasy seasons come down to, is just the ability to survive by staying active and filling those holes as they pop up in our lineup. So that's what this waiver wire show is all about. And if you'd like the written version of this, of course, you can get access to that on pff.com right now with a PFF Plus subscription. Nate has updated that this morning. Just be sure to use the promo code PFF Fantasy Podcast 25 to get 25% off a PFF Plus subscription. And then you'll also get access to all of our rankings and articles and tools and PFF grades for every player on every team. Just make sure to use the promo code PFF Fantasy Podcast 25 for 25% off. And yeah, again, help us out as the littlest podcast here on the network, to beat out all the other PFF podcasts as we do a little competition here. But otherwise, just in general, again, you guys have been great at supporting the channel as always. So make sure you keep that going if you can. Be sure to like, subscribe, hype the video on the YouTube mobile app as well, and help us grow the channel as well. And we really, really, really do appreciate that. But let's get into the week's waiver wire options, Nate, and we'll start at quarterback like we always do. And Jackson Dart for the New York Giants got his first NFL start and his first NFL win on Sunday. He threw for just 111 yards and a touchdown, but more importantly, ran 10 times for 54 yards and a rushing touchdown, Nate.
Yeah, while wide receivers were the big injury news this week, we also are entering bye week season. We've got the Falcons, Packers, Bears, and Steelers on bye weeks this week, so you might need a quarterback this week in order to help your team if your quarterback has a bye week. So Dart, as you said, was probably the most interesting quarterback this week because of that rushing, like you said. That rushing line, the 10 rushing attempts, 50 plus yards, and a touchdown. We don't see that all that often from quarterbacks outside of those elite fantasy quarterbacks. We've seen Lamar Jackson do that, Josh Allen do that, Jalen Hurts, Jaden Daniels. The only other quarterback to accomplish that at any game over the past 2 years is Justin Fields, and Fields just had a huge game last night. We drafted him almost entirely because of his rushing ability, not so much what he can do in the passing game. So we could see Dart be a very similar quarterback to Justin Fields in that way. Hopefully Dart ends up being a better passer, but we don't know that for sure. Malik Neighbors had his season-ending injury, so he's not going to have as good of options to throw to. But this is a team where they're probably going to be behind in a lot of games and relying on Dart to try catching up in these games. So I think he's a very intriguing option because of that rushing. I don't know for sure that he's going to become this elite fantasy rushing quarterback, but I'm willing to pick him up this week just to find out if he's able to have more of these games like this. And the Giants also have a pretty nice schedule on that. They have a couple of games throughout the rest of the season that are against some of the worst defenses, and some games over the rest of the season against some of the best defenses. So he's probably not someone I want in my starting lineup every single week, but there is a variety of matchups that you can put Dart in your fantasy starting lineup for a number of these weeks over the rest of the season. And that includes this week playing the New Orleans Saints, a fairly favorable matchup for quarterbacks so far this season. So if you are in need of a bye week, replacement, I think Dart is also a fine option, as well as that long term, maybe he becomes this elite fantasy rusher, in which case you have a huge value here.
Yeah, I'm with you, right? Like it's obviously it's going to be really hard to believe in the passing offense without Malik Neighbors, but at the very least, like you said, there's rushing upside here with Dart. Who knows if he's going to take off 10 times a game again, but obviously if, that's going to be a constant with him, then there's significant value there for his fantasy potential like we just saw this week. And yeah, I don't mind him as a streaming option, right? Depending on matchup and whatnot, because as we know, there are already way too many quarterback injuries so far this season. Now bye weeks are starting up as well. So yeah, Dart should definitely be on our radar. Speaking of quarterback injuries and those filling in for said injured quarterbacks, Jake Browning got the Monday Night Football spotlight last night, or at least half a spotlight, I guess, since the game kind of overlapped with Miami and the Jets. And it was against the Denver defense, which wasn't ideal, Nate, but Jake Browning will have better matchups ahead going forward.
Yeah, it has not been a good start for Browning, so completely understand that he is going to be available in a ton of leagues. I'm not expecting a ton of people to pick him up, but I am taking a chance on him because of the schedule for the Bengals upcoming. They face the Vikings, they face the Broncos these past 2 weeks, which are two relatively tough matchups, but they have one of the best schedules for fantasy quarterbacks over the rest of the season. That includes some upcoming matchups, that also includes some long term matchups. Um, Play the Detroit Lions this week, a team where the Bengals will fall behind like they have these past two games, but they should have more of a chance to catch up. The Lions have allowed a decent amount of points, a decent amount of fantasy points to quarterbacks this season. So if you are desperate enough for a quarterback this year, I'd be fine picking him up, but I'd also be fine picking him up just because the Bengals have a ton of these matchups upcoming that are against, they have 5 games against teams in the bottom five in fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. So they face a ton of these teams that have allowed a lot of points to fantasy quarterbacks this season. So hopefully he turns it around. Also, a chance that if this keeps up, it might be another quarterback who ends up playing for Cincinnati. So Browning might not be the best option because of that fact that he could get benched or Cincinnati could trade for a quarterback at some point after these first 2 weeks. But there's at least a chance that Browning returns to his 2023 form, in which case he would be a fantasy starting quarterback in some of these matchups.
Fair. Yeah. I look, yeah, it's obviously it hasn't been a great start right against the Vikings and the Broncos. And who knows, we'll see how they do against the Lions, but obviously, that offensive line still hasn't been great. And we'll have to deal with Aiden Hutchinson, who looks back to form as well, which is good for the Lions, maybe not so much for the Bengals, but again, the weapons are there, right? Jake Browning has Jamar Chase, he has T. Higgins to throw the ball to there, and like you said, the schedule does get better. But if he doesn't turn it around, obviously there's the risk of him being replaced as well at some point. But still, I think these down games are going to leave his rostership down quite a bit, and somebody that's kind of worth a stash there if you're going to need somebody for a bye week fill in the coming weeks. But maybe a more interesting option as well, Nate. Matthew Stafford is available in just over 50% of ESPN leagues right now, and he just put together a nearly 400-yard passing game with 3 passing touchdowns. He's got Puka Nacua and Devontae Adams as his top targets there. Bound to be some great passing outputs from Stafford, Nate.
Oh yeah, Stafford, we've seen him these past couple years be at times one of the best passers in the NFL. He has been one of the best passers in the NFL so far this season, one of the highest passing grades for quarterbacks. The big thing with Stafford is even though he has been one of the best passers at times, that hasn't always translated to fantasy success over the long term. Only 10th in fantasy points so far this season, even though he's graded as one of the best passers. And that's in large part because he doesn't have that rushing upside. He has run for -4 yards on 10 carries so far this season. Unfortunately, quarterbacks get penalized for those kneel downs at the end of games, and that's typically the only time where Stafford really runs with the ball. So that puts him at a big disadvantage compared to a lot of other quarterbacks who haven't been as good of passers, but do have more of that rushing upside. So we've seen who Stafford is for these past couple of years, and that hasn't changed. He's been this high floor, low upside option at quarterback, but because he's been so elite as a passer so far this season, that has put him in the low end quarterback one range. I do think it'll be a little bit more difficult because of the schedule at times. They face the 49ers this week, which the 49ers defense has played decently well so far this season at slowing down quarterbacks at the very least. So I'm not sure I'd want Stafford, particularly for this week. I think there can be a couple matchups where you can have him in your lineup. I do think maybe not this week, but some of these other weeks, he's a kind of perfect bye week fill in because you can get his high floor there. But he's not someone I would want in my fantasy starting lineups for several weeks over the rest of the season. And I'm not sure anything can really change in order for him to be that consistent quarterback one without several other quarterbacks in the league getting injured.
Yeah, so with Stafford, yeah, we know there's no rushing upside there or anything else. But look, I mean, I guess like passing wise, like he's been up there with the best in the league as far as like volume goes, and as long as he has Puka and even Devonte Adams, if those guys stay healthy, like I lean toward him, being on the fringe of being a fantasy starter, especially as bye weeks and stuff like that come in. But yeah, and like you said, this week not the best matchup. Even the 49ers without Nick Bosa, they're still a tougher defense, I guess, for quarterbacks. And it's always weird with the short weeks. I never love the short week stuff. It just kind of sucks. So we see players underperform on Thursday night football because of the short week all the time. So I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case for the Rams passing offense. But even still, like if you need a quarterback, I still might prefer Stafford over maybe a lot of the other streaming options this week. It's I don't know. It's such a bleak position right now just because of the injuries and stuff. But yeah, there's options out there. Stafford definitely one of them for me. And then another one that we might see back here soon is JJ McCarthy with the Minnesota Vikings. Nate, it wouldn't be surprised, I guess, to see him rest up through the team's week 6 bye week, but still some potential here with JJ McCarthy if he gets it going on his return.
Oh yeah, this is one where even if he's playing this week, I probably don't want to start him this week. I wouldn't be surprised if they rest him one more week and then they have the bye week there, so that'll give him another 2 weeks to recover. This is more for the long-term prospects for him. Like even after the bye week faces the Philadelphia Eagles, Los Angeles Chargers, not ideal matchups, but the Vikings have arguably the best schedule for quarterbacks from week 9 to week 17. So if McCarthy is able to return able to play kind of similar to how he did at the end of week 1, where he was able to bring his team back and play as good as we thought he would at the start of the season. That schedule looks so good from week 9 to week 17, 7 of their 9 matchups against teams in the top 11 at allowing fantasy points to quarterbacks. So it's just good matchup after good matchup after good matchup for McCarthy over the second half of the season. So no, there's certainly a chance that he doesn't play as well as we thought he would play. Maybe a chance that Wentz continues to be the starter longer than we thought he'd be the starter. But I think there's at least a possibility that McCarthy is a top 10 fantasy quarterback over the second half of the season. So I'd be fine putting him on my roster now with that chance that he starts to um, play better over time. I wouldn't be surprised if even if he's not available in your league right now, he could be released in more leagues after this week after not playing, and then released in even more leagues after he's not playing against the Browns, followed by the bye week. With all these injuries that have happened and the bye weeks that are coming up, I could see a lot of fantasy managers releasing McCarthy. So even if he's not available now, definitely keep an eye on your waiver wire in case he gets dropped, and then I'd be looking to pick him up.
For sure. Yeah, we talked about the potential, right, in this passing offense a lot this offseason. Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison's back now, TJ Hawkinson, all those guys are currently healthy in the lineup. Kevin O'Connell's found plenty of success with his quarterbacks in the past. And look, JJ McCarthy, he's only played 2 NFL games, right? So we could be a little bit patient here, see how he does when he gets back. And if there's, if it's still more of the same, then, we can judge him harshly, publicly shame him, all that stuff. No, don't do that. Just, drop him and move on, right? He's going to come with little cost right now. So yeah, fine adding JJ McCarthy as a speculative ad here, and we'll see when he gets back.
We'll
Before we go
also
on to
add,
the
I
oh
want
yeah, go
to
ahead.
add with the Vikings, they've also had a lot of injuries on their offensive line this season.
Mhm.
This past week, they were without 3 of their offensive linemen for most of the game. So the Vikings offense in general, even outside of the quarterback, hasn't looked as good as we hoped. I would put a lot of that on the offensive line so far this season. So I wouldn't be surprised if the offensive line is able to get healthy over these next couple weeks. Their bye week coming up as well. That'll help everyone in the offense, not just McCarthy.
Yeah, plenty of room to bounce back here for the Minnesota offense for sure. But before we do move on to the running backs, I want to let everybody know that this episode is brought to you by Fabric by Gerber Life. Parenting is filled with high pressure decisions, and it can be difficult to tell if you've made the right choice for our kids' future. But here's a simple decision you can make today that could have a meaningful impact on your kids' future: opening a UGMA kids investment account with Fabric to start their investment journey early and give them a financial head start. Fabric by Gerber Life was designed by parents for parents to make it easy to plan for and manage your family's financial path. With a kids investment account from Fabric, you can start investing in your child's future today. It's all online, and setting up an account can take you just 5 minutes. Get started investing with as little as $1 a day, then manage your child's account and monitor their investments right from your phone. There are no contribution limits, multiple tax advantages, and they're SIPC insured up to $500,000, plus no commission fees and just a low flat monthly maintenance fee. Fabric has partnered with Gerber Life, trusted by millions of families like yours for over 50 years. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help protect their family. Start investing in your child today at meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. That's meetfabric.com/PFFNFL, MEET, fabric.com/PFFNFL. Portfolios managed by Fort Washington Investment Advisors, Inc. Additional services provided by Apex Clearing Corporation. All investing is subject to risk. Learn more at meetfabric.com. Okay, let's move on to the running backs now, Nate. Headlined by the same player that was on the top of the list last week, right? And probably for maybe the last time if he continues to play as well as he did this past week. Houston Texans' new lead running back, Woody Marks.
Yeah, he was also, I think, the week before that as well, because he has slowly but surely worked his way up the Texans depth chart. Was low on the depth chart in week one, surpassed Damian Pierce for week two. Pierce has been a healthy and active the past 3 weeks. Then Dare Ogunbowale, who's been their receiving back these past 2 seasons, plus a couple seasons before that as well. He stopped playing as much on offense. He was the third down back, now isn't playing as much on third downs. I think he played one offensive snap this past week. And then this week, it was him and Nick Chubb. They were still in a rotation throughout the game. Both running backs saw some snaps on pretty much every drive throughout the game. So I know a lot of people are saying that Marks is now the guy because he had more carries and more stats in this game, more offensive snaps. I'm not positive that he is now the number one guy that he'll be the starter this upcoming week, because it wasn't an exact rotation by drive like you sometimes see by teams where it's one running back on one drive, running back on the other drive. This time it was one running back taking the lead on each drive, kind of flipping between drives, but each running back seeing time on those drives. The only difference is that the drives where Marks was on the field more often, those drives tended to be more successful, in part because Marks was playing so well. So I wouldn't be surprised if Marks becomes the starter, but I would be a little bit hesitant to put him in your starting lineup this week. But Marks is someone that you definitely want to invest in now. He is probably going to be one of the top running back options on the waiver wire, not just these past couple weeks, but going forward as well. I'm not expecting that many more running backs to be in as good position to be a starter over the rest of the year. Since Marks has played better than Chubb, there is a decent enough chance that Marks becomes the guy in the Texans offense. Whether or not he has as big of a workload, we hope this week, but I think it'll come over time. They are playing the Baltimore Ravens, which is an interesting matchup this week in that the Ravens have had a ton of injuries on defense, particularly on that defensive line. So you typically think of the Ravens as one of the hardest teams to run against, but that has not been the case so far this season. It'll be interesting to see Lamar Jackson's health as well, but the Ravens are also a team where they are desperate for a win after facing some of the best teams in the NFL. They just faced the two teams with the best winning records last season over these past 2 weeks. So this is a team where the Ravens should be looking to bounce back. A chance they score a ton of points against this Texans defense, in which case the Texans might not be able to run the ball a lot because they're passing to try catching up. So I think Marks has a pretty wide range of possibilities in this game, just depending on how the game script plays out. But when you compare him to the rest of the running backs available on the waiver wire, even though I just said at the start of this, I'm a little hesitant about what his role will be exactly this week, he still might be the best option if you need a running back off the waiver wire this week, even though he might not be the ideal option. But I still want him long term, still willing to spend a decent amount of your free agent budget on him.
Yeah, I mean, look, the 17 carries obviously was great, but the passing down role was definitely helpful. And it was against the Titans, which obviously they have their concerns, but the all around volume, I think, is just what really encouraged me here. We talked about Nick Chubb's drop off again last week. It was kind of more of the same from him this week, just not very effective as much anymore, it seems. So why not give the rookie some help and or more work and see if it can help, right? Obviously, they found success with him this week and just got their first win of the year. That got to help his case. So I'm leaning towards believing the Woody potential here. And yeah, the Ravens, like you said, they are banged up like crazy. Obviously, their top linebacker Roquan Smith is going to be out as well. So there's room to run on this Ravens offense or defense. It's just a matter of if they're going to be in a game plan where they're allowed to run as much, or if they're going to be playing catch up. But we'll see. I think a lot will depend on Lamar Jackson's availability there. So, all right, from a rookie running back potentially taking over for a veteran running back to a situation where a veteran running back won't go away to allow for a rookie running back to take over. That is in Washington, where Chris Rodriguez Jr. continues to eat into Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt's playing time quite a bit, and even led the team in rushing yards this week, Nate.
Yeah, they continue to use their unique running back rotation and that they're using their veteran running back on the first two drives of the game, and then Krosky Merritt is rotating in more as the game progresses. So we continue to see that this week. It is worth noting that Krosky Merritt was dealing with an injury, which could have impacted things a little bit, but I still expect Rodriguez to be the primary running back on the first two drives of the game and then continue to mix in throughout the game, where Jeremy McNichols also part of that rotation, playing all the third downs, all of the 2 minute drills. So this was a clear 3 man rotation where all three running backs played nearly the exact same amount of snaps this week. That should remain the case. It's not an ideal situation for fantasy whatsoever. But when you compare him to all the other running backs available on the waiver wire, there are plenty of other backups who are consistently seeing playing time, not always consistently seeing touches, where Rodriguez is one of the few people that is available on the waiver wire that is consistently seeing touches. So if you are more desperate for a running back, looking for someone more for the short term, are desperate for a bye week replacement, Rodriguez is probably one of your best options off the waiver wire, even though this week facing the Los Angeles Chargers, which is not an ideal matchup. But if you're looking ahead to the upcoming weeks after that, the Chicago Bears, Dallas Cowboys, two defenses that have a lot of points, a lot of fantasy points to running backs. So if you need a running back and are looking ahead to the two upcoming weeks beyond week 5, Rodriguez could be your best option.
Yeah, and look, we never love a running back committee in fantasy, right? But it at least gives those deeper leagues some hope and more players to get use out of, and that's kind of exactly what Chris Rodriguez is, right? Like he'll probably never be the team's true lead back, even if something happens to Ja'Cory Krosky Merritt, but he'll have value as he gets playing time, and even if his ceiling is limited, it's those deeper leagues where we'll get the most run from him, and especially when bye weeks start kicking in here. So yeah, do like that Rodriguez is getting involved for those deeper leagues. So um, next player on the list here went off on Sunday morning, which was a perfect time for me to be playing against him in a big matchup. Love that. Kenneth Gainwell played a big role with Jalen Warren, a surprise inactive Sunday morning, Nate.
Yeah, Warren added to the injury report, and it was this like weird situation where sometimes a player is not practicing just because he is a veteran who has a day off, and the Steelers had a lot of those players this past week. And then the player just continues to be on the injury report, but they sneakily add an injury in there. So that's what happened. He wasn't on the injury report with an injury on Wednesday. An injury got added on Thursday, and then he was questionable for the game, ultimately inactive. A lot of times there's reports from a national reporter saying a guy is likely or unlikely to play sometime before inactives are announced. But in this case, it was just at inactives. So anyone who slept in on Sunday morning may have accidentally left him in your lineup. But I was someone who added Gainwell to my lineup in a couple of leagues and was happy to see that. Gainwell was the clear lead running back for Pittsburgh throughout the game, playing as the primary running back in every situation. Had a great stat line in the game, helped by touchdowns as well. Showed that he remains clearly ahead of Caleb Johnson on the depth chart. The only thing for me is the Steelers have a bye week this week, which should hopefully be enough time for Warren to rest up and be closer to 100% when they're back the following week. And we had seen Kenneth Gainwell's playing time decline every single week prior to week 4 because Jalen Warren was more taking over the running back. So I could see Gainwell maybe mixing it a little bit more because of how well he played this week, and maybe Warren isn't quite at 100%. But I am still of the opinion that this is Warren's backfield, and as long as Warren is healthy, he will be the one playing over 50% of snaps, in which case Gainwell is someone I probably don't want in my fantasy starting lineup. So he's already taken in a ton of leagues, and in those leagues, he probably should remain on rosters because plenty of handcuffs are typically taken in those rosters. He's the clear handcuff. The top running back's injured. He's had success, so it makes sense to keep him in a lot of those leagues. I'm not sure how many leagues he needs to get picked up in because it's mostly just 10-team leagues where he's still available. But if you might need a running back for week 6, there's a chance Warren continues to miss more time. We haven't heard too many updates on the injury, in which case Gainwell could be a starter in week 6. And there's plenty of other running backs on this list who probably aren't going to be starters in week 6.
Yeah, I think just concerning, like considering the role that he had this week, right? On the chance that Warren misses another game, obviously, they got the bye week, so there's more time for Warren to heal up. But I mean, it was a huge role, obviously, and he was returning kicks as well. Like he just had a monster game. So and we've talked about Gainwell in the past. Just even when Warren is in the lineup, who knows how bad the injury is? Maybe he's active, but they're maybe not going to lean on him as heavily. So Gainwell can still have a role here in Pittsburgh over especially over Caleb Johnson at this point. So Nate, we also saw Kendre Miller saw a season high 11 carries for the New Orleans Saints this week. Even found his way into the end zone. We referenced him on here before, and how Alvin Kamara and the winless Saints may try to give work to the younger back in some way. What did you think about Miller's role for the Saints this week?
Yeah. So the Buffalo Bills, another team that are winning games, but their run defense has not been very strong. That continued to be the case this week. And the Saints were able to keep things close enough that they were able to keep with the run game. Kamara had 15 carries for 70 yards, so Kamara still looked decently good, but Miller looked better with 5.9 yards per carry. He was the one to score the touchdown. We have seen Miller's playing time increase at least a little bit every single week so far this season. That continued to be the case this week. And the Saints are a team that are 0-4. There's rumors that they could be trading Alvin Kamara. I'm not sure that'll necessarily happen, but as the Saints fall further and further away from the playoff race, it does make sense for them to give more time to their 23-year-old back, who could be the future at the position for the team, over Kamara, who is 30. And Miller, if he keeps playing relatively effective, then that gives them even more reason to play Miller. So we could see that change happening sooner rather than later, which we kind of saw this coming a little bit ahead of the season with Alvin Kamara, that he wasn't going to have as much production this year because a lot of his production these past couple years has come as a receiver. But their new head coach, Kellen Moore, we've seen it happen time and time again with running backs. He's had some of the best receiving running backs in the NFL, but their receiving production has always declined when Moore is the offensive coordinator and then bounces back once Moore is no longer their coordinator. So that's happened again with Kamara. He's barely been involved with the passing game, at least relative to other seasons. So Kamara hasn't been able to do the same kind of stuff that has made him special in past years.
Mhm. Yeah, and for Kendre Miller, like specifically, I found it encouraging that it wasn't like they were getting, blown out against the Bills this week, and it was, garbage time, and he was getting some use there. Like it was a surprisingly close game, and Miller still got some decent usage in there. Like it would obviously be one thing if the Bills were up like 31-0 or something, and he was getting those garbage time touches, but pretty encouraging that they continued to go with him in a close game here. So yeah, could be a sign of things to come here with the Saints backfield. But another team RB2, Nate, but this one continues to get work here. Also kind of eating into the lead running backs share here. Blake Corum for the Los Angeles Rams.
Yeah, this was a very interesting game in that we've talked about Corn for a while now, has been playing very well over the first 3 weeks of the season, was averaging like 7.1 yards per carry. So was definitely outperforming Williams. Not that Williams was playing particularly bad over the first 3 weeks. It was just Corum was looking very good. So we saw the Rams make a fairly significant change to their backfield over the first 3 drives of this game. Both running backs were seeing significant work on all three drives. It seemed much more like a 50-50 committee, something that we really haven't seen much of anything from with Sean McVay over the past several years with the Rams. So for these first three drives, things were starting to look very different for the backfield. The only thing is Williams was outperforming Corum over those first three drives. So for the rest of the game, it went back to Williams being the main running back for the team, playing the vast majority of snaps over the rest of the drives. It was Williams playing 35 snaps compared to 10 by Corum. So much more similar to what we're used to seeing out of the backfield. So it was back to being Williams' backfield. And I wouldn't be surprised if we're back to that kind of situation next week where Williams is back to being the main guy, Corum's back to being the clear lead backup. But it was good to see that Sean McVay is willing to mix things up. If Blake Corum is clearly outplaying Kyron Williams. So if Corum keeps playing well in his limited time, or if Williams starts to not play as well in his large amount of time, I wouldn't be surprised if we see a change again where Corum's given more opportunities, and if we're back to a case where it's a 50-50 split or close to it, and Corum is outplaying Williams in that 50-50 split, then it wouldn't be surprising if Corum becomes the starter. So lots of backfields where I don't think there's any case where the backup becomes the starter without an injury. I think there, even though it's a small chance, I think there is a chance that Corum could be the starter at some point this season, even if Williams doesn't suffer an injury.
Yeah, that's kind of the thing with this Rams backfield this year, right? Is like for the first time, it feels like there's some wiggle room there, right, with Sean McVay and Kyron Williams, and look, and we talked about the Rams offense a little bit before with Matthew Stafford. Like they can definitely score. We saw them not be afraid to use Corum around the goal line, at least in week two, right? We haven't seen it really in the past couple weeks, but again, there's that wiggle room where they're showing that there's some willingness there. So if they do go back to that, then Corum could definitely have a little bit more value, and at the very least, like a strong handcuff option, like we like. So, next up, another one of the handcuffs for us here. It has been on the list here for almost the whole season, I guess the whole season, right, Nate? Taj Brooks of the Cincinnati Bengals.
Yeah, Chase Brown just continues to not be all that effective in the run game. Averaged less than 3 yards per carry the first 2 weeks of the season, gained 3 yards total on 10 carries in week three. Week four was arguably his best performance in the run game, and that was with 40 yards on 10 carries. He was a little bit more consistent, but he didn't have a run for more than 6 yards in the entire game. So, pretty unique stat line to be able to average 4 yards per carry without a run longer than 6 yards, but was a little involved in the pass game, 3 receptions for 31 yards. Brooks did not see the field on offense, which was a little disappointing to see, but there's a chance that the Bengals offense tries to find a spark at some point, and there's a chance Brooks is the one to provide that spark. So because Brown hasn't been as effective in the run game as we expected heading into the season, I still think there's a chance that at some point they decide to make the change. And if they do make the change, I think Brooks is the person that starts to see a lot more work.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely makes sense there. And then we also have another, constant here on the waiver wire list, Nate. Again, it's Keaton Mitchell of the Baltimore Ravens. We're holding on here just in case, right?
Oh, yeah, this is the same situation that it's been all season. He's been a healthy and active, but I do think if there was an injury to Derrick Henry, we'd see Mitchell take over as the lead back for the long term, with Justice Hill remaining in his role, even though Hill put up a lot of fantasy production last week, but a lot of that was right at the end of the game with a very long play. So I do expect Mitchell. He's played very well. The only reason he's inactive is because he's not as involved in special teams. So I think there's a chance. So if you're looking at a handcuff that is available in over 99% of leagues, I think Mitchell is a fine handcuff to consider.
Mhm. And then the last running back on the list, Jaden Blue for the Dallas Cowboys. We saw Miles Sanders get hurt on Sunday Night Football. He did not return to that game with an ankle injury. And even though Jaden Blue wasn't active this past week, we could probably expect him to fill in for Sanders if he misses more time.
Yeah, I think definitely if Sanders is inactive, then Blue would be the number two running back and see a decent amount of workload. There has been talk, even if Sanders is healthy, that Blue could start to be active on game days sooner rather than later. It sounds like My coach has been asked about him and said that he is getting closer, and they're happy with his progression so far. So even though we have not been able to see that progression on game days yet, there's a chance Blue becomes at least the number two running back. I could see him overtaking Sanders at some point this season. Javonte Williams has been playing a lot better than expected, so it does seem unlikely that Blue is going to overtake Williams and be the number one running back on this offense anytime soon. But I am willing to still take a chance on Blue now before we start to see him play on game days, just in case he starts to play excellent and does see a lot more playing time than we expected.
Okay, let's talk wide receivers now because there will be fantasy rosters in need here after losing CD Lamb last week, Malik Neighbors, and Tyreek Hill this week. Some massive losses at wide receiver, Nate. So let's maybe start with one of the in house replacements for Malik Neighbors with the New York Giants, Darius Slayton.
Yeah. First off, I'm assuming Wandale Robinson is taken in your league already. If he is not taken, he's the person I'd want to pick up first off in this Giants wide receiver room. The Giants wide receivers, they've been very basic in their wide receiver rotation prior to the injury. It was Darius Slayton as an every down wide receiver, Robinson joining in three wide receiver sets. Their backup wide receivers combined for 18 total snaps over the first 3 weeks of the season. So they clearly do not have as much faith in their backup wide receivers as they did their three starters. So now that's kind of condensed to the two starters with Slayton and Wandale Robinson going from a slot only receiver and three wide receiver sets to an every down wide receiver. It was their undrafted rookie Collins and then Jalen Hyatt kind of splitting that role in three wide receiver sets after the Neighbors injury. So with Slayton, this injury isn't going to impact Slayton's playing time at all because Slayton was already seeing over 90% of offensive snaps. That's not going to change. What I do expect to change is his target rate. We saw last year Neighbors missed two times, and Slayton was excellent, had 14 receptions, 179 yards, and a touchdown. He is someone who last year was like kind of consistently right on the range of being on the waiver wire because he is someone who was playing well enough at times that his fantasy production was among the best among the wide receivers available on the waiver wire. He just didn't have as high of a ceiling with the other wide receivers in New York. But we know without Neighbors there, that is a lot of targets that can go around to other players. And we expect a lot of those targets to be going to Darius Slayton going forward. Particularly this week faces the New Orleans Saints. So I think Slayton, even if you're not someone who needs a long-term wide receiver option and just need a bye week fill-in, I would still consider Slayton specifically for this upcoming week. But I think he is someone who can be that borderline fantasy starter over the long term. Only real concerns is one, I expect Robinson to be the top target in the Giants offense going forward. There should be enough targets to go around to two wide receivers, but I do expect Robinson to be the top guy. And I would not be surprised if the Giants try to make a trade for a wide receiver. I know, in our opinion, the Giants probably are not a team that's going to make the playoffs this season, but the coaching staff is also fighting to keep their job, and they also want to put Dart in the best position to succeed as possible. And with that, they probably want to get him another target. So at least a chance they make a trade for a wide receiver, in which case Slayton would still be a full-time starter in this offense. He just might not see quite as many targets as we hope, but I think Slayton's someone that he's available in a ton of leagues, even in like some 16 team leagues, he should be available. So should be among the most picked up, if not the most picked up player off waiver wires this week across all leagues.
Yeah, I mean, it's him and Wandale Robinson, obviously there in New York, and obviously without Malik Neighbors, this isn't like the sexiest wide receiver core. It's arguably one of the worst in the league now, but someone has to get targets, right? They're gonna pass the ball. They're likely gonna be behind or at the very least competitive in games. So as they pass, there's gonna be players on the receiving end of those passes. So not want trying not to get too caught up in the maybe lack of name value here or them not being exciting rookies or something like that. But sometimes beggars can't be choosers. So yeah, Slayton, he's performed well without Malik Neighbors in the past, like you said, and he's going to be an option for us. So yeah, Darius Slayton, absolutely at the top of the list here, but maybe you do want an exciting rookie instead. Well, you're in luck because the Tennessee Titans are another contender for worst receiving core in the league, but at least they have Alec Iomanor or Io Manor. I don't know how. I've been hearing Io Manor. Maybe I've been saying it wrong here. So maybe it's Io Manor, who had 7 targets on Sunday, 2 catches, but still the clear leader in that Tennessee receiving core right now, Nate.
Yeah, I'm not expecting him to be available in most leagues from the people listening to this, but he is still available in nearly 70% of ESPN leagues somehow. So if he is available in one of your leagues, I definitely love to pick him up. He's been performing among the best of the waiver wire targets this year. And typically, those are kind of the boring veteran wide receivers without a lot of upside. The fact that one of the top wide receivers available off the waiver wire is also a rookie wide receiver playing with a rookie quarterback that we expect to play better as the season progresses. That makes him kind of a very clear and obvious wide receiver target. We saw some weirdness with Calvin Ridley this past week. They said after the game that he was banged up, but he was rotated out more than usual in the first three quarters and then barely played in the fourth quarter. So either he was banged up heading into the game, in which case he wasn't on the injury report. He should have been on the injury report. Shame on Tennessee for not putting him on the injury report if he was injured. But then there's a chance that he got banged up during the game, in which case he was still rotated out more early in the game than expected, which was weird to see. So something going on in Tennessee at the very least. But regardless, I could very well see him being the top target in Tennessee over the rest of the season.
Yeah, a nice 30% target share for Io Manor. I'll try to say it as Io Manor now. In week 4, that was double what it was in week 3. So, they're recognizing him as kind of probably the best potential in that group right now, and they're trying to get him the ball. Like it's just been kind of a struggle so far with Cam Ward in that offense, but hopefully better days ahead there. Nate, I'm not going to overreact this time. I effed it up last time and jinxed him, but after we watched him on Monday Night Football last night, I'm just going to leave it at this. Troy Franklin of the Denver Broncos is on the list again, Nate.
Yeah, had 4 catches for 55 yards, led the Denver Broncos in targets this past week, had some plays that could have gotten him a lot more yards in this game that didn't quite work out. So that was a little disappointing to see. Could have been higher on this list had he made those plays, but Denver was also weird in that Pat Bryant got more involved in the offense this week. His playing time has slowly but surely been increasing. And that was at the expense of both Franklin and Marvin Mims. So it wasn't good to see that Franklin's playing time went down this week, but we also saw the playing time change with the running backs. That we've seen Denver change up how they do things from one week to another. We could see Franklin bounce back this upcoming week. We could see Franklin's playing time go down this upcoming week. So this definitely comes with risk, but Franklin is someone who has been heavily targeted in this Denver offense. Bo Nix did not have the best start of the season. Definitely played better last night on Monday Night Football, but battles the Philadelphia Eagles next week, a contest in which the Broncos probably need to throw the ball a lot in this game to try keeping up with Philadelphia's offense. So could see Franklin having a decent week this upcoming week, but just another young player that a chance he's the top player on his passing game over the rest of the season, even though Cortland Sutton's there. Sutton also had a big game, but Sutton's also been rotated out a little bit more than we expected so far this season. So a chance that Sutton, if Pat Bryant earned significant playing time, I wouldn't be surprised if Sutton is someone who loses snaps to Pat Bryant this season. So we'll see what happens. But again, I'm happy to take a chance on a young wide receiver who could improve over the rest of the season, who has also had some pretty big games already to start this season.
Yep. All right. How about a hard to miss wide receiver on the field for the Green Bay Packers? Jordan Love found Romeo Doubs 3 times for a touchdown on Sunday night, Nate. He's been pretty heavily involved in the red zone thus far this season, at the very least. Obviously exploded here in week 4. Think we could trust the usage going forward for Romeo Doubs?
We can at least trust the usage in terms of playing time because the Packers have been fairly consistent in how they've used their wide receivers over the past 2 seasons now, where Romeo Doubs is their clear X receiver. Wicks and someone else. Last year was Watson. This year it's been Golden rotating as a Z receiver. Jaden Reed playing in the slot. Now with Reed injured, Wicks has moved over to the slot, allowing Golden to see more playing time. And in general, this has led their wide receivers to rotate a little less often. So Dobbs, who typically plays around 75% of offensive snaps, these past 2 weeks that has increased to around 85 to 90% of offensive snaps. So even though Dobbs and Reed, two very different wide receivers, the Reed injury has impacted Dobbs' playing time in a positive way. So that's been a nice thing. We have seen throughout Dobbs' career, especially these past 2 seasons, His target rate has typically been between 16 and 20%. So he is someone that we know is a starting wide receiver who sees a lot of playing time and sees an okay target rate. So he's been that kind of borderline someone to pick up on the waiver wire for years now. There were plenty of weeks last week where Dobbs was just the top option by default. And we know he can score a lot of touchdowns. He scored 8 touchdowns in 2023. That fell to 4 touchdowns in 2024. He's already reached those 4 touchdowns again in 2025. So you don't necessarily want a wide receiver in your starting lineup where you know he needs a touchdown in order for him to have a lot of fantasy value, since we have never seen him be this really high target earner in the Packers offense, but they do like throwing to him in the red zone. So if you are desperate for a wide receiver, I know you don't want to be chasing the wide receivers who score 3 touchdowns one week after not doing much over the rest of the season. But with all the injuries at wide receiver, like we already mentioned, the season enders, both 49ers wide receivers were injured this past week or re-injured. Darnell Mooney suffered an injury. Cedric Tillman's out for a number of weeks. Calvin Austin's out for a number of weeks. So even in some of these deeper leagues, there's a lot of wide receiver injuries, not just the biggest names at the position.
Yeah, at the very least, right? Like, we talk about the red zone usage. I've been writing up the red zone report, which you can check out every Friday morning. Use the promo code PFF Fantasy Podcast 25. But he's been like the team's most involved route runner at wide receiver in the red zone. He had a pretty strong target rate in that area of the field, even coming into this week as well. Obviously, didn't see 3 touchdowns coming, obviously, but if you're a reader of the red zone report and are kind of studying this stuff, then the hints were there for sure. But yeah, nice to see for Romeo Dobbs. Okay, in week 3, we saw Ben Johnson and company kind of make a concerted effort to get Luther Burden involved. Week 4, we didn't see it as much. That being said, still a very highly talented rookie who can break through here in coming weeks and worth getting in on early with Luther Burden in Chicago, Nate.
Oh, yeah. Well, a lot of the focus so far has been guys who can help your fantasy team immediately if you need a wide receiver. Burden is not that player. He is more of that long term option. The second round rookie, he's kind of been mixed in a lot of different wide receiver sets. Played a lot in single wide receiver sets, a little bit in 2 wide receiver and 3 wide receiver sets in place of DJ Moore and Zacchaeus. And then the Bears have also used some 4 wide receiver sets, which have been burden on the field. The big change that we've seen recently is even though they don't run a ton of 2 wide receiver sets, especially with Colson Loveland dealing with an injury, we have seen Burden mixing in more in 2 wide receiver sets. That's DJ Moore to play a little bit less in 2 wide receiver sets. So DJ Moore only played just slightly above 75% of offensive snaps this week. That's the lowest amount of snaps that he has played in a game for Chicago these last 2 seasons. So even though it hasn't been this huge shift to Burden yet, we have seen him chipping away a little bit at Moore. Moore has had the most success so far this season. It's been Rome Odunze who's been the clear #1 target for Chicago. Don't see that changing this season, but I think there's at least a chance that Burden continues to mix in more often, whether it's taking over for Moore or taking over for Zacchaeus or it becoming more of a rotation between all 3 of those players. I do think there's a chance that Burden starts to see the field more often. And this Bears offense has looked very good at times. So I think Burden could become the #2 target in this offense still, even though it hasn't happened so far this season. So if you have that spot on your bench to have a developmental wide receiver, I think Burden is someone that's definitely worth considering because his upside could be the highest of all the wide receivers we're talking about today.
Yeah, and I think like for dynasty, especially like a nice little maybe buy window here for dynasty leagues, like specifically dynasty managers who are maybe looking to contend this season and have Burden on their roster. They may be motivated to move him for a piece to help win this year, right? It's especially if you're one of those rebuilding rosters, right? That's kind of the perfect time to take this shot, especially now that the rookie fever has kind of died down a little bit. There's going to be more of a willingness with those managers and Burden. I think, like Nate said, has a lot of potential in this offense if it goes right. No need to overpay, but again, rebuilding and you have a good short-term fantasy starter that you can give up, then that could be your spot here to make a move for Luther Burden. And they're heading into the bye week this week as well, so there's some room to make that move. Okay, Carolina, they can use some help at wide receiver too. Jalen Coker is eligible to return off injured reserve this week, Nate.
Oh yeah, we've talked about him for a couple weeks now, and the reasons we've liked him before have continued to be true. The Panthers' offense has been up and down, has looked very good at times, has looked okay at other times. A team that I think can have a number two wide receiver that is fantasy relevant, and so far they haven't had one. Xavier Legette has missed the last two games with injury. Hunter Renfrow had that big week too, but has been more of a rotational player these past 2 weeks. So I think Coker can step in, whether he ends up being the slot receiver, whether he ends up being the Z receiver. Maybe it's a combination of the two. Regardless, I think he is the second most talented wide receiver in this on this team outside of Team X. So I think Coker, the Panthers have also had the injury at tight end, Jatavian Sanders, so that also influences things. So I don't know if Coker will necessarily be back this week. We'll see if he ends up being on the active roster week 5, or maybe he'll need another week or two. That's unclear at this point, but I think Coker, once he joins the starting lineup, could have a pretty decent rest of the season.
Absolutely. Okay, another wide receiver injury that we got this week happened in Cleveland, where Cedric Tillman is now expected to miss multiple weeks. So there might be room for Isaiah Bond to contribute more as he did in week 4, Nate.
Oh yeah, Bond is someone who has slowly but surely worked his way up the Cleveland Browns depth chart. Even in that first preseason game he played, he was already rotating in with Thrash as their slot receiver. Slowly over time, he has kind of overtaken Thrash on the depth chart to be their number 3 receiver. That continued to be the case this week. The only thing is, after the injury, in general, they haven't used a lot of 3 wide receiver sets because they have their 2 tight ends that they like. That became the case even more so. We saw Bond's playing time actually decrease a little bit this week, despite Cedric Tillman's injury, which was kind of weird to see. But Bond still is someone who's seeing a decent amount of targets in this offense. And I could see him being the top target at wide receiver for Cleveland over the long term if he continues to work his way up the depth chart and continues to gain the trust of his quarterbacks, whoever his quarterbacks ends up being, whether Joe Flacco continues at quarterback or they make a change sometime in the near future. But I think Bond, someone available in over 99.5% of ESPN leagues, someone that you can probably get not just in 12-team leagues, but 16-team leagues. I think with all the other wide receivers that you could be picking up, Bond will probably fly a little bit more under the radar, but he's had a decent role. He's seen some targets. He's had some nice plays in there, and there's a chance that continues to grow. It's worth noting he wasn't with the team for most of training camp and the preseason, so he is a little bit further behind than a lot of other wide receivers. So the fact that he's already worked his way to now second on the depth chart with Tillman reportedly out multiple weeks has been pretty impressive for Bond.
For sure. Um, and then last night, obviously the Tyreek Hill injury happened. So we know Jalen Waddle is going to get involved. We saw Darren Waller get involved. We'll talk about him in a little bit. But how about the second wide receiver spot, Nate? Anybody that stands out to you? You've got Nick Westbrook Akine here.
Oh yeah, even before the game happened, I had Malik Washington here because I thought if Tyreek Hill were to get traded, it would be Malik Washington stepping in as that number 2 wide receiver. But after Hill's injury last night, which is season ending, it was Westbrook Akine who stepped in and became the every down wide receiver for Miami. So a little surprised to see, but probably maybe shouldn't have been because of how Washington's been used. Washington, a little bit undersized wide receiver, used for some runs here and there, used for some trick, not necessarily trick plays, but more unique plays at times. So Westbrook Akine, we saw him with Tennessee at times be a full-time receiver. So it looks like that's going to be the case here with Miami. Notably had those 9 touchdowns last year, despite only having 30-something receptions. So a chance Westbrook Akine again becomes a touchdown machine for Miami. Probably not someone I necessarily want to rely on, but if you're in one of these deeper leagues and needs just any wide receiver who is a full-time starter in an offense, I think there are some worse options than Westbrook Akine out there. So he is someone, again, available in the vast majority of leagues as well.
Yeah, that was a crazy run last year for Westbrook Akine. We'll see if he can keep that going in Miami. And then we got Alec Pierce on the list next. Nate, I missed this week. He's coming off injury. AD Mitchell probably didn't earn himself more playing time with the mistakes that he made last week, but Alec Pierce could be back here soon.
Oh yeah, I had a Mitchell anytime touchdown, and I went through the full range of emotions on that play. But Pierce was in the concussion protocol. A lot of times that someone's in the concussion protocol, they only miss 1 week. There's no guarantee that Pierce will be back this week, but Pierce had been playing surprisingly well so far this season. I wasn't expecting him to have a big season considering he is the high average depth of target option in the Colts offense. And Daniel Jones has been more known short for throwing those shorter passes. But Pierce has had a couple of big games, 68 yards in week 2, 67 yards in week 3 before that concussion. So he has been playing well. This week faces the Las Vegas Raiders. So I don't expect Pierce to be a great long-term option for your fantasy team, but specifically in this matchup, if you're looking for just that 1 week feeling at wide receiver, the Raiders have allowed a decent amount of deep passing yards so far this season. Had the fourth most passing yards allowed on deep passes over the first 3 weeks of the season. So I think the Raiders are a good matchup for Pierce. Pierce could have another big play or two, had 60 plus yards those 2 games. So I can see him making all it takes is 2, maybe 3 deep catches, and he's worth having in your fantasy starting lineup.
Yep, for sure. And then last wide receiver on the list, another Monday Night Football contributor last night was Alan Lazard of the New York Jets. We know this team is looking for a secondary option here to emerge in New York. Anything that you saw from Alan Lazard last night?
So it wasn't so much Lazard last night, but the potential of him maybe going to the Pittsburgh Steelers. We have made that link, and several others have
Mhm.
made that link throughout the offseason, ever since there were rumors of Aaron Rodgers going to Pittsburgh. For some reason, it hasn't happened yet. I'm not sure why it hasn't happened yet, and whatever that reason is, maybe might prevent it from happening. But there's been even more reason to believe that this should be happening because we saw the Calvin Austin injury. Austin is expected to miss multiple weeks for the Pittsburgh Steelers. They have been completely unsettled in who their wide receiver depth chart is outside of DK Metcalf and Austin. We saw Roman Wilson as the number 3 wide receiver in week 3. He fell to the number 5 wide receiver in week 4. It was Ben Skowronek who was playing in 3 wide receiver sets last week. And then it was Scotty Miller who took over for Calvin Austin after the injury. Probably don't want to pick up any of those wide receivers in Pittsburgh because we don't even know who's going to be the number 2 wide receiver this upcoming week. It could be a rotation of guys. So Pittsburgh definitely in need of a wide receiver. Even without the Calvin Austin injury, they're probably in need of a number 3 receiver. And now they're in need of a number 2 wide receiver. And with Lazard, the Jets have also been unsettled with their depth chart. We saw Josh Reynolds return this week. Reynolds was at least back to being the number 2 receiver. It was Tyler Johnson who was a surprise inactive this week. But I think um, the Jets don't necessarily need Lazard. He hasn't had much of any production with the team so far this season. It was Lazard who was the healthy inactive week 1. He's been the 4th wide receiver on the depth chart. He's fairly interchangeable with Tyler Johnson in that offense, so Johnson easily could be the number 4 wide receiver going forward. Wouldn't be surprised if Lazard could go back to being a healthy and active in this offense. So if the Jets don't need Lazard and the Steelers desperately need someone, and Lazard has that chemistry with Aaron Rodgers, it makes a ton of sense to me for that trade to happen, but it hasn't happened yet. So I'd be fine picking up Lazard now just in hopes of the trade happening because Lazard was a top 12 fantasy wide receiver over the first couple weeks of last season when the Jets, before they had Devontae Adams in the offense. So Lazard, I think, is capable of having or capable of being a fantasy starter with Aaron Rodgers again. So we'll see if it happens. But if you need a wide receiver and are in one of these deeper leagues, I'd be fine stashing him on my bench just to see if the trade happens this week or not.
Interesting. Yeah, it'll be yeah, we'll see. I mean, the Steelers obviously they have a bye week this week, so maybe they got some room to tinker with it. Aaron Rodgers can spend more time calling his old friend Alan Lazard to see if he's willing to come to Pittsburgh if they can make a trade there. Okay, wow, we're already at an hour. We got tight ends left here, so I'll try to keep it tight here. Nate, Brenton Strange leads our tight end waiver targets once again here for Jacksonville. Another game where he was pretty heavily involved. So Brenton Strange continues to be a big part of this Jaguars offense.
Oh yeah, unfortunately, a lot of teams needing wide receivers, so we had a lot of wide receivers to
Yeah,
cover. But with tight end, there are a couple of interesting names this week. I'll start with Strange, but I can keep it brief with him because he's been on this list every week. He has been among the top fantasy tight ends. He's around tight end 16 so far this season. The big thing with him is he hasn't scored a touchdown yet. So if you remove the touchdowns from all tight ends this season, he is a top 8 fantasy tight end this year, and he's still available in over 75% of ESPN leagues. So, really, at this point, he should be on fantasy rosters. He should be in consideration for fantasy starting lineups in a number of leagues. So, I think he is an excellent bye week fill in. Even if you already have a tight end that you're happy with, if your starting tight end has a bye week in these next couple of weeks, I would definitely look to pick up Strange so that you can have him when your tight end has a bye week.
nice, like that. And somehow Darren Waller has returned, Nate. He came into Monday night, played his first game, and scored not one but two touchdowns. So Darren Waller, like right now, he's healthy. He's involved in the offense. So Darren Waller makes the list.
Yeah, before Monday Night Football, I had him at the bottom of the list just because it's like, okay, he's back. Who knows what's going to happen? And he scored those two touchdowns. His playing time was fairly limited, which we kind of expected to happen because even last year, Johnny Smith, his playing time was pretty limited in the Dolphins offense. So Waller, playing pretty consistently on third downs, was also playing in a lot of two tight end sets, which was good to see because Johnny Smith wasn't always playing in two tight end sets. So the fact that Waller was playing in those two tight end sets was pretty huge for his future fantasy potential. The big thing was in 11 or 21 personnel on early downs. He really wasn't on the field very often. Wouldn't be surprised if that changes over the course of the season. It's understandable after not playing an NFL game in 23 months that they were going to limit his playing time. Could see that increasing. The fact that he scored those touchdowns was great. And now with Tyreek Hill out for the season, there's a chance that Waller is the number three option in the passing game, with Jalen Waddle and Devon Achane being the top two options in the passing game. But Waller could be that third option, in which case he could become a fantasy starting tight end over the rest of the season. So I want to take a chance on him now, available in over 90% of ESPN leagues. And he looked good, and he's been a top fantasy tight end before. So maybe the fact that he did take those 23 months off from the game has given him enough time to recover from having 3 straight years of injuries. So a chance he's back to being among the top fantasy tight ends. So pick him up now because it's going to be a lot harder to come up later in the season if he keeps playing this well.
Yeah, it's yeah, for now, it's a, maybe why not Darren Waller. We'll see if he can keep it going. Okay, we also have Isaiah Likely in Baltimore, Nate. Obviously he's missed the first few weeks of the season here as well, potentially could return as early as this week.
Oh yeah, he returned and just didn't see anything in the stat line.
Hmm.
It was kind of weird because they don't have Patrick Ricard, so they didn't have 21 personnel or 22 personnel, which were personnel groupings were likely played a lot last season. He did work in a decent amount in 12 personnel as well as 11 personnel. 11 personnel looked pretty similar to last season, and Mark Andrews did have a lot of targets this week, but they were also likely easing likely in. So it's the same situation that it's been for a while. I probably don't want Likely in my fantasy starting lineup, but he has played very well at times. He's graded well at times. And Mark Andrews hasn't always been the most consistent. So a chance Likely overtakes Andrews at some point, in which case Likely would be a fantasy starting tight end. He's just not there yet.
Yeah, and Mark Andrews with his 7 catches for 30 yards this past week, 4.3 yards per reception, very low. So hopefully Isaiah Likely could come in and hopefully eat into that role a little bit more as we kind of expected coming into the season. But Mason Taylor, rookie for tight end for the New York Jets, Nate, continues to be involved for their passing offense at least.
Yeah, he's had a decent workload so far, playing over 70% of snaps on early downs and 11 personnel, just over 70%. And on third downs and 11 personnel, consistently playing in two tight end sets. They've only gotten their two tight ends involved so far this season. So, not a perfect workload for him, but still good for that 11th to 15th range in terms of how often he's on the field, which is nice to see. Wasn't getting that involved in the passing game the first 2 weeks. Saw a couple of targets in week 3 and then caught 5 passes for 65 yards last night on Monday Night Football. So it was good to see him finally see those targets. The Jets do not have a number two option at wide receiver, like we talked about a little bit with Lazard. I don't think they've had anyone over like 10 or so receiving yards in a game outside of Garrett Wilson, not wide receiver. I think Tyler Johnson is their number two wide receiver in terms of receiving yards so far this season, even though he was a healthy and active last night. So there's room for someone else to get involved in the passing game. Last night it was Taylor, and there's a chance that it continues to be Taylor over the rest of the season.
Nice. And then in Houston, Dalton Schultz, 6 targets, 5 catches, 30 yards. He's still available for those in need of some tight end depth as well, Nate.
Yeah, he's been here the last 2 weeks because in 12-team leagues, it's been hard to find a tight end worth rostering. This week, it did get a little better now that Darren Waller is there as well as Mason Taylor. But if you need that kind of safer, high floor, low ceiling option at tight end. Schultz has been basically the highest scoring tight end on the waiver wire outside of Brenton Strange so far this season. Schultz, Texans have had a lot of injuries at tight end outside of Schultz, so that has helped his playing time remain relatively high, and they face the Ravens this upcoming week. Ravens have allowed the seventh most fantasy points to the tight ends over the first 3 seasons. Travis Kelce just had arguably his best week of the season this past week against Baltimore. So a decent enough matchup. So if you want a tight end specifically for this upcoming week, Schultz could be your best option to pick up off the waiver wire.
There you go. And then last name on the list, another rookie tight end here for this time for the Los Angeles Chargers. Oron Gadsden is still available in almost all of ESPN leagues right now.
Yeah, Gadsden was the top receiving tight end for the Los Angeles Chargers this past week. He had that big week 3 with Will Dissly out, had more receiving yards in that game than the rest of the Chargers tight ends had put together over the entire season. That did directly lead to more playing time this upcoming week. Still not quite the ideal amount of playing time, played 47% of offensive snaps, so that is not enough for me to comfortably put him in fantasy starting lineups yet. 23 of 42 snaps on early downs, 6 of 10 snaps on third downs. Ideally, would be more consistently on the field on third downs. And Will Dissly was still out this past week. A chance that he mixes in more. It'll be interesting to see who's inactive, who's active once everyone is healthy again. But I think a chance that Gadsden is someone who I don't want in my fantasy starting lineup now, but there's a chance he becomes the clear receiving tight end for Los Angeles over the rest of the season. And those tight ends have been fantasy relevant in Greg Roman's offenses in the past. Haven't been as relevant this season because the wide receivers have been playing so well, but a chance at least one of these wide receivers stops being as productive as the season progresses.
Yeah. I don't think Lad McConkey could afford to be less productive, but hopefully he's not the one to take that hit. But yeah, there's definitely room for Gadsden. We've talked about him before being a nice receiving option and still a rookie, so could take some time here to get more involved. But that's it for this week. Thanks to everybody who tuned in. Again, good luck attacking the waiver wires. Like if you're one of those teams that is getting killed by injuries right now, make sure to stay active. It's all the more important. Eventually, your league mates are going to start dealing with injuries as well. You just got to get ahead of the things and start adding these players on your waivers and keep your foot on the gas and make sure you got the depth to survive it, because that is what it comes down to a lot of the time. So thank you all for tuning in. And Nate, thank you to you as well. Before you go, please do let everybody know what you got going on over at pff.com.
Sure. At this point of the season, it's pretty business as usual. We have the recap articles that go up immediately after games, have the waiver wire article out, which updated after Monday Night Football. The usage and production report is out. That has my top takeaways from this past week. So the most important things that you need to know of what happened with player usage, as well as a tool that breaks down the data, how I kind of picture it. And it's what I use a lot of the times when I'm writing my articles and seeing what trends have happened with players over time. So if you want to dig into any players that we didn't talk about, that's a great way to look into those players, is that usage and production report. Along with that, had 5 to add, 5 to drop, 5 to buy low, 5 to sell high. That went up today. Rest of season rankings also went up. In a couple hours from now, I will have my rankings for this upcoming week. So if you're looking ahead specifically for next week, those rankings will be up. Tomorrow we'll also have dynasty rankings, start set the day after that, and then do it all over again with week 5.
Nice, love it. Yeah, and then for me, IDP fantasy report, all our snap shares for every IDP, those will be up there. Waiver targets, and a lot more in that article. Our IDP rankings will be out this week. Wide receiver man zone coverage report, the red zone report as well will be out on Friday. All of which is powered by the PFF data team, the best data team in the multiverse here at PFF, and all the data that they collect every single week here in the NFL. And make sure to use the promo code PFF Fantasy Podcast 25 if you've been looking to get in on a PFF Plus subscription, and you'll save 25% off. I'll be back with IDP Start Sit on Wednesday, Thursday, somewhere around there this week. But good luck to everybody in week 5. And until next time, peace out.